Sometimes a family secret is so heavy that 3 generations refuse to speak about it. And when that secret involves $4.2 million, a missing will, and a grandmother who hasn't spoken to her sons in 7 years, someone has to break the silence. Dr. Phil stood center stage, holding a sealed manila envelope, looked directly into the camera and said, "This family is going to learn the truth today. Right here. Right now." What happened in the next 47 minutes would change everything they thought they knew about their family. The studio was frozen. 73-year-old Margaret Sullivan sat on the left couch, a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. On the right, her 2 sons, Robert, 52, and Michael, 49, sat as far apart as the furniture allowed, refusing to make eye contact. Behind them stood 3 grandchildren, Emily, 28, David, 26, and Sarah, 24. None of them had been in the same room together for 7 years. Dr. Phil didn't sit down. He stood between the 2 couches, the envelope in his hand catching the studio lights. The audience could feel it. Something was different about this episode. This wasn't going to be a typical family mediation. "Margaret," Dr. Phil's voice cut through the tension. "You called my producers 6 weeks ago. You said, and I quote, 'My sons think I stole their inheritance. I need Dr. Phil to show them the truth before I die.' Is that correct?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the tissue. But what Dr. Phil didn't know yet, what nobody in that studio knew, was that the envelope he was holding contained something that would shatter every assumption about this family. Rewind to 6 weeks earlier. Margaret Sullivan had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe 8. She had one mission before she died: reunite her family. But her sons wouldn't take her calls. Her grandchildren were caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and confusion. The dispute started 7 years ago when Margaret's husband, Thomas Sullivan, died suddenly at age 71. Thomas had been a successful commercial real estate developer in Texas. Everyone knew he was wealthy, but nobody knew exactly how wealthy until the will was read. Except there was no will. Or at least, that's what the lawyer said. Thomas had died intestate, without a legal will. Under Texas law, everything went to Margaret as the surviving spouse. The house, the properties, the investment accounts. All of it. $4.2 million. Robert and Michael were devastated. Not just by their father's death, but by what they saw as their mother's betrayal. Their father had always promised them the business. Had always said the boys would take over. Had always talked about legacy. She destroyed the will. Robert had told anyone who would listen. Dad would never leave us with nothing. She got rid of it so she could keep everything. Michael was quieter, but equally bitter. We built that business with him. We worked 70-hour weeks. And she just took it all. The grandchildren tried to stay neutral, but it was impossible. Family gatherings became war zones. Holidays were divided. Phone trees were activated to make sure Robert's family and Michael's family never showed up at the same event. Margaret spent 7 years living alone in the family home, surrounded by her husband's things, cut off from her sons, seeing her grandchildren only in secret meetings that felt like affairs. And then came the cancer diagnosis. And with it, a phone call to Dr. Phil's producers that would bring them all to this moment. Back in the studio, Dr. Phil addressed the sons. Robert. Michael. You both believe your mother destroyed your father's will. You've accused her publicly. You've hired lawyers. You've told your children their grandmother is a thief. Why? Robert stood up, his face red. Because it's the truth. My father would never. Sit down. Dr. Phil's voice was quiet but absolute. Robert sat. I didn't ask what you believe. I asked why. What evidence do you have? Michael spoke this time, his voice tight with controlled anger. The evidence is that there's no will. Dad was a meticulous businessman. He would never die without a will. The only explanation is that Mom got rid of it. Dr. Phil turned to Margaret. Did you destroy your husband's will? No. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Did you know where he kept his will?" I thought he had one. With our lawyer, Mr. Henderson. But when Thomas died, Mr. Henderson said there was nothing. No will. I was as shocked as the boys." Dr. Phil paused. The studio went completely silent. Then he did something no one expected. "Stop the tape." Dr. Phil turned to the control room. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone could feel the shift. This was off script. Dr. Phil walked over to Margaret, knelt down beside her couch. The microphones barely picked up his words, but the audience could see his lips moving. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil squeezed her hand, then stood up and turned to the producers. "Bring Mr. Henderson in. Now." The audience gasped. Nobody had known there was another guest waiting backstage. An elderly man in his 70s walked onto the stage. George Henderson had been the Sullivan family attorney for 34 years. He looked uncomfortable under the studio lights. Dr. Phil didn't waste time. "Mr. Henderson, did Thomas Sullivan have a will?" "Yes." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Robert jumped to his feet. "Then where the hell is it? Why did you tell us?" "Because I couldn't find it." Henderson's voice was steady. "Thomas came to my office in March 2016, about a year before he died. He said he wanted to update his will. He took the original copy with him. Said he wanted to review it before we made changes. That was the last time I saw it." Michael's voice cracked. "So Mom did take it?" "No." Henderson looked directly at Michael. "Margaret called me the day after Thomas died. She was frantic. Said Thomas kept important documents in his home office safe. Asked if I knew the combination. I didn't. We had to hire a locksmith to open it. The will wasn't there." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil held up the envelope. "This morning, before we started taping, Margaret gave me something. She said she found it 2 months ago when she was packing up Thomas's things to move to hospice care. She'd been putting it off for 7 years. Too painful. But the cancer didn't give her a choice anymore." He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, and a small brass key. "Thomas Sullivan didn't keep his will in the home office safe." Dr. Phil read from a handwritten note. "He kept it in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. This is the key." The studio erupted. The sons were on their feet. The grandchildren were crying. Margaret sat frozen, staring at the key. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear to God I didn't know." Dr. Phil's voice cut through the chaos. "Sit down. All of you. Right now." They sat. "Before we opened the safety deposit box this morning, with Mr. Henderson and a bank officer as witnesses, I want you to understand something." Dr. Phil looked at Robert and Michael. "Your mother has been living with your accusations for 7 years. 7 years of being called a thief. 7 years of being cut off from her grandchildren. 7 years of dying alone because you assumed the worst about her." Robert's face crumbled. We didn't know." "You didn't want to know." Dr. Phil's voice was hard. "You wanted someone to blame for your pain. Losing your father hurt, so you made your mother the villain." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He walked back to his chair, sat down, and pulled out a second document. The will was exactly where Thomas said it would be. Box 247. Mr. Henderson verified it's authentic. Thomas's signature, proper witnesses, dated March 2016. He looked at Margaret. "Do you want to know what it says?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't care about the money. I never did. I just want my boys back." Dr. Phil turned to the sons. "Your father left the business and all associated properties to you. 50-50 split between Robert and Michael. The house and personal accounts stayed with your mother, about $800,000 total. The business and properties? $3.4 million. The numbers hit like physical blows. Robert covered his face with his hands. Michael stood up, walked over to his mother, and collapsed on his knees in front of her. "Mom! I'm so sorry. I'm so—" But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Margaret reached out, put her hands on Michael's face, and said, "I forgive you. I forgave you 7 years ago. I was just waiting for you to come home." Robert crossed the stage, fell to his knees beside his brother. The three of them held each other while the studio audience wept openly. The grandchildren rushed forward, surrounding their grandmother in a circle of arms and tears and apologies. Dr. Phil stood back, letting the moment breathe. Then he did something he rarely does. He wiped his own eyes. After several minutes, when the crying had quieted to sniffles, Dr. Phil spoke. "This family lost 7 years because of assumptions. Because pain turned into blame. Because nobody had the courage to look for the truth." He held up the brass key. This key was always there. In Thomas's things. In a note Margaret had been too heartbroken to read. The truth was always there. But finding it required something harder than opening a box. It required opening your hearts to the possibility that you were wrong. The epilogue came 3 months later. Margaret Sullivan died peacefully, surrounded by all 3 generations of her family. Robert and Michael had moved her into Robert's guest house, taking turns caring for her. The grandchildren visited daily, making up for lost time with stories and laughter and presents. Before she died, Margaret asked Dr. Phil to share one message. "Don't let money or pride or fear steal your family. Life is too short and people are too precious." The brass key now sits in a small frame in Michael's office, next to a photo of the whole family taken on Dr. Phil's stage, the last picture where Margaret was strong enough to smile. Robert and Michael used their inheritance to establish the Thomas Sullivan Foundation, providing free legal services to families navigating estate disputes. They wanted their father's legacy to prevent other families from enduring what theirs did. The grandchildren? They tattooed tiny brass keys on their wrists, a permanent reminder that truth is worth searching for, even when it hurts to look. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil later said in an interview, "In 30 years of doing this, I've seen a lot of family pain. But this one reminded me that sometimes the enemy isn't a person. It's assumption. It's pride. It's the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our pain. And the hardest thing in the world is admitting those stories might be wrong." The episode became one of the most watched in Dr. Phil's history. Not because of the drama, though there was plenty, but because of what it represented, the possibility of redemption, the power of truth, and the reminder that family is worth fighting for. The Sullivan family lost 7 years. But they got to spend Margaret's last 3 months together. And in those months, they learned what their father had known all along, that the real inheritance wasn't money. It was each other. But the impact of that single episode rippled far beyond one family. In the weeks following the broadcast, Dr. Phil's team received over 47,000 emails from families in similar situations. Estate disputes, missing documents, years of silence built on assumptions. The Sullivan story had touched something raw and universal. Dr. Phil created a special follow-up episode featuring estate planning attorneys, family therapists, and the Sullivan brothers themselves. Robert and Michael sat on that same stage where they knelt before their mother and shared their message. Don't wait for a Dr. Phil moment. Have the hard conversations now. The episode led to a partnership with the American Bar Association, offering free resources for families navigating inheritance discussions. Margaret's final wish, that no family should suffer what hers did, was being realized in ways she never could have imagined. Emily, the oldest grandchild, went back to school to become a family mediator. She'd watched her grandmother die carrying the weight of her son's accusations, and she'd decided her career would be preventing that pain in others. "Grandma Margaret taught me that silence is expensive," she said in an interview. "It cost us 7 years. I want to help families find their voices before it's too late." David started a podcast called The Brass Key, where families share their reconciliation stories. The first episode featured audio from Margaret's final family dinner, recorded just days before she died. You can hear her laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years, surrounded by the voices of her sons and grandchildren. Sarah became a hospice volunteer, sitting with dying patients who'd been estranged from family. She carries copies of the Dr. Phil episode on her tablet. Sometimes people need to see that reconciliation is possible, she explained. Grandma gave me a gift in those last 3 months. I'm just passing it on. The brass key became more than a family symbol, it became a movement. Jewelers across the country began receiving requests for tiny brass key pendants and charms. Social media filled with photos of families holding keys, sharing their own stories of reconciliation under the hashtag #BrassKeyFamily. The symbol represented what Margaret had embodied, that it's never too late to unlock the truth, even when you're afraid of what you might find. Dr. Phil kept the original key, the one from Safety Deposit Box 247, in a display case in his office. It reminds me why I do this work, he told his staff during a production meeting. We can't give people more time. Margaret only had 3 months. But we can give them truth. And sometimes truth is enough to heal years of wounds. The Sullivan Foundation grew beyond legal services. They added grief counseling for families dealing with sudden loss, and mediation services for families in dispute. Robert served as executive director, Michael as board chairman. Every client received a small brass key as a reminder, the truth is always worth finding. 5 years after that episode aired, the Sullivan grandchildren gathered at Margaret's grave. They brought their children, Margaret's great-grandchildren, who would never meet her but would grow up hearing stories about the grandmother who refused to die angry. They placed brass keys on her headstone, a tradition they'd established the day she was buried. We tell them about the day Dr. Phil stopped the cameras, Emily said, her 3-year-old daughter on her hip. We tell them about Grandma Margaret waiting 7 years for her boys to come home. We tell them that love is patient, and truth is powerful, and family is everything. The episode won a Daytime Emmy. Dr. Phil donated the award to the Sullivan Foundation. In his acceptance speech, he said, "This isn't my story. It's Margaret's. And every family out there carrying secrets they're afraid to unlock. The brass key reminds us, truth might hurt, but silence kills." And somewhere in Texas, in a bank vault, Safety Deposit Box 247 sits empty now. But the key that opened it unlocked something far more valuable than a will. It unlocked forgiveness, reconciliation, and 3 final months of love that a family will treasure forever.